Is that actually the PowerPoint itself?
Oh, you didn't have Acrobat? You don't have Acrobat?
I don't have it downloaded the PDF, not the PowerPoint. So it's in Safari. It's in Safari.
So only for this one, but once we switch to that.
Yeah, but then we have to go back to this one, and the display was working. Okay. Oh, you want to just get started? Okay.
All right. We can get started. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties with the projection. This is the NetConf working group session. So in case you're in the wrong room, this would be a good time to exit. We will start with the chair slides. So take care of the note well. This is the updated version that IETF just published. Any contributions, discussions that you have either in this room or on the mailing list are covered under this note well. Before we get started, some administrative things. There is a red box next to the mic. You probably would want to stay within that box if you want to be viewed in MeetCo. On the mic, please make sure you state your name slowly and clearly for people who are going to be the note takers so that they can record it. There are 2 sets of blue sheets. Sign in. We need at least a couple of note takers. So at this point, we're going to ask for volunteers for at least 2 note takers and 1 Jabber scriber. Do we have any volunteers for either one of them? All right, thanks, Lada. So Lada will do the Jabber. We need 2 note takers. Okay. All right, thanks, Baz. 1 more, at least, please. Okay, we really would. Okay. All right, thanks, Robert. With that, the link to the Etherpad is there. I would encourage anyone in this room to add and update the notes in the Etherpad. You'll find the agenda in any of these 3 locations on the website. Status. So RFC 6536 biz went through last call, went into ISG. There was a comment that went into further review with the working group. I think we are right now wordsmithing on the last set of changes. I hope to turn it around and send it back to BIDMA to progress it through ISG. No. Zero Touch received some last call comments. Kent is working on the last set of changes. He'll talk about them today. And the submission is planned for December for ISG consideration. Same thing with Keystone Suite of Drafts. It received last call comments, and there are further updates probably needed. Am I right? Okay. And the last call for that is planned in January. The Yang Push Suite of Drafts, we had 5 of them that we had identified that we sent into pre-last call. At least one of them received quite a few comments, and we will discuss the status of each one of them after the presentation by the authors. The NMDA suite of drafts were adopted as work group items, and we expect that a quick turnaround on them and send them into last call in December. And finally, UDP, which is the other chartered item, is still work in progress. Here's the agenda for the chartered items. We have 80 minutes to kind of cover. So since we have already started a little late, we want to see if we can earn some of that time back. And here are the non-chartered items. This would probably be a speed talk for most, because they are all 5 minutes presentations. All right, and that we should be able to move to the first set of slides. I think we have Robert, who's going to be presenting the NMDA suite.
Rob, you just have to tell me to move to the next slide.
Are people able to hear in the back? No. Okay. You might want to pull up the mic. Thank you.
Is that better? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll be presenting on these 3 drafts as a set because they're all closely related. And actually, I want to spend more time on the Yang library BIS one. That's the one that has the more interesting questions. So it's on behalf of the NMDA authors. Let's move on to the next slide, Kent. Kent? Thanks. So a quick context recap to remind you of what it is, then a summary of the updates of the drafts, there's not that much to say, and discussion of open issues. So effectively, there's just a reminder of what these 3 drafts are trying to cover. They are aimed at producing updates to NetConf, RESTconf, and Yang library to support the NMDA data store architecture that's going through NetMod at the moment. The aim of these protocol updates are minimal extensions only. So we're trying very hard not to add anything else in beyond what is required to support NMDA to make it easier to implement and to get the drafts through more quickly. The functionality that we're adding to both NetConf and RESTconf is equivalent. So the aim is the draft should look quite similar. I think it's a little bit more effort to make the text of the 2 drafts more closely aligned. The Yang library changes are more interesting and more extensive. In terms of the draft that's currently being described, the -02, we've had further discussion beyond that point. So I'll also be presenting what is a proposed change to that. And again, another idea of how to incorporate it to cover schema mount better. As I said, we want these drafts to complete quickly, and we're aiming for working group last call before the next IETF. So hopefully once these issues are closed and we align the text, we should be done. So just a quick summary of what changes we've made. We've clarified the origin metadata encoding and aligned the text between the 2 drafts. And effectively, this encoding is a fairly simple one where you report the origin metadata status for each node. But if the status is the same as the parent, then you don't need to report it. So the intention is that this should be fairly compact and easy to include. We've clarified that testing for NMDA, so basically to check whether you're talking to an NMDA server, is achieved by querying the new Yang library using the new get data operation on the operational state data store. So that effectively validates that the device is supporting the new RPC. It also supports the operational state data store, and it gives you information back that you require. So Andy has expressed that he would quite like there to be an explicit capability for this as well. But it would actually effectively be the same as doing this operation. So the authors are not quite clear whether there's any great benefit of doing that, whether you actually need an extra capability as well, because the pragmatic way of testing for this is to do that operation. So if anyone's got any opinions on that, please either speak now or send them to the ALIS. With RESTconf, we clarified that the with defaults extension does not apply to operational. So the operational data store has sort of a different way of handling defaults. The default values are regarded as being informational use only, and that the operational state data store will contain all the default values that are in use by the server. So in terms of the NetConf draft, there's this definition of the data that's in use, and that effectively replaces the use of this with defaults. And then finally, we've added the additional query filters based on origin and config true that were requested for working group adoption of these drafts. So the next steps, there isn't actually that much to do here. Align the structure and descriptive text between the two protocol drafts. This is really just a stylistic thing. It's not changing any content. And just we need to make sure that we've got the same sections in both drafts, cover the same things. I think the NetConf draft is missing a conformance section at the moment. Generally, other than that, there's these two burning issues that we need to close on: the conformance question that's been discussed and the structure of Yang library, and then hopefully working group last call. So on to the first of the two issues, and they're quite closely related really, is conformance. So the NMDA architecture document states that all conventional data stores must have the same schema, and that the schema for the operational data store must be a superset of all configuration data stores, but data nodes may be omitted through deviation. So what we're trying to say here is that you can apply deviations to modify types and that sort of thing, and it applies to all data stores. It applies to all instances of that. But the per data store differences that you're allowed are you're allowed to remove nodes through deviation, and you can do that either to the set of conventional data stores, or you can do it to operational. And you're allowed to also have features that are enabled in one data store and not another, but with the caveat that if a feature is enabled in one of the conventional data, well, all the conventional data stores, then it also has to be enabled in operational. So we're trying to strike a balance here between not making this too complicated, but actually ensuring that it accurately reflects what the devices will do. And a key consideration here is we want to be able to relate between the data that's in running or intended and the data that's in operational, the config true nodes. So on the next slide,
actually, just 1 second. Our AV guy's here, and I'm going to switch our display unit. I think it should work now. No.
So the picture you can't see will demonstrate, I've done a diagram to try and illustrate the differences between the schema and the two data stores.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, come back. Is this the slide, or next slide, or this one?
Right, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is saying the same thing, but in a diagrammatical format. So what I'm trying to do is show you that the schema between the data stores here. On the left, you have the conventional data stores, running, intended, candidate, and startup. And on the right, you have operational. And the blue boxes represent the regular schema nodes that are represented by the Yang modules. And then in orange, I've done a device level or server level deviation. So that'd be a normal deviation where you're modifying the type, or you're adding properties, or adding values into the value space. And those deviations apply everywhere. So that's the requirement of NMDA. Then I've also shown here in the empty boxes the case where you're allowed to have data store specific deviations. And in this case, the only thing you're allowed to do, either through a deviation or in the case of using features, is to remove some of those nodes. So in the diagram on the left for the intended data store, you can see that the last node is obviously not implemented in that data store, or in that schema, in data store schema, and the one on the right, operational, shows you that middle node is not implemented in the schema for that data store. But the idea is that for all the ones that are here blue and orange, you can take the contents of the running and intended data store and you can check whether those have been exist in operational. So you can do a sort of diff operation between the two in a limited sense. Next slide. So the author's opinion is that the current conformance is correct and it's required. I think we are still debating as to whether there should be more clarification in the draft. That may help with the questions that Andy's been asking. There has been some expression that would be nice if it was possible to have a simpler conformance, in particular using the same schema for all the data stores with no per data store features or deviations. but we think that there's reasonable use cases for both of these. The per data store features are useful when we were migrating, is I think 8.22.3 RC that has a routing config or router ID feature. And when you align the config and state trees together into a single tree, you want to retain the capability of the device to be able to choose whether or not you're allowed to configure the router ID or whether it is purely operational data. And so allowing that feature keyword to be expressed just in operational and not config allows that, that capability effectively. In terms of deviations, we think that they're important, partly as a sort of migration path, that when people start implementing it, it's not necessarily the case that everyone from day one will be able to implement all of these operational states for all the configuration. So we're expecting that there may be some deviations in that case for an interim period while vendors catch up with the work that's required here. So that's what's expected there. Longer term, it's desirable if there aren't any of these differences. It's not meant to be a way of actually modifying the schemas. It's meant to be a way of, how do you say it, a migration path. Next slide. Thank you. So all this boils down to what the Yang library structure looks like. And so we've been trying to get that structure right. We've had several goes, and the aim is to cover the required functionality, obviously, with the per data store deviations. We also want it to be as simple as possible. And in the most recent revision that's not in the draft, but it's been discussed on NetConf and it's included here, is we want to try and optimize it for the mainline case. So in the case where you don't have any per data store deviations, and the case where you don't have per data store features, then keep the output very simple. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through effectively the iterations of the 4 versions of the Yang library structure. The last one I've included is one that's been extended to effectively support the sort of schema mount requirements as well. So the following 4 slides I present. First of all, I'll start with the current Yang library, so RC 7895 tree diagram, just to see where I'm starting from. Then I'll present the current Yang library BIS, so that's the -02 version tree diagram. That covers the required functionality, but is potentially a bit more complicated. Then in number 3, I'll propose a simplified version of that that we think is better. And then finally, that simplified version tweaked or extended very slightly to mean that it can be reused for schema mount. So this is the current Yang library version. The bits in red that I'm pointing out are the fact that currently it's called module state. So we're going to rename that to get rid of the state path and actually just to make it more generic, because the new version of Yang library won't just cover modules, it will also list the data stores. One other change that's sort of coming through in these various things at the moment is that the key for the modules in the current Yang library is name and revision. And because of that, the revision is actually a union, because you may or may not have a revision for a module. So if you don't have a revision for a module, there's a special case of using an empty string to represent that. And that structure is because the same module list is being used to represent both implemented and import-only modules. So you'll see from the structures later on that I propose that splitting those 2 out. The features here is just a list of features, a leaf list of features, and the deviations, again, they have the same requirement to have use both name and revision to reference those deviations, because the main list is in terms of names and revision as the key. And there's a conformance type that says whether it's an import only or an implemented module. So this is the current version in the BIS draft, Yang library BIS. And effectively, this is the one that we've been using for a while. The key changes here effectively is that the module key now is an ID, it's a string, rather than being name and revision. And that's because you may require, with this structure, separate module entries if you have per data store deviations and per data store features. So you effectively have to come up with a separate key. And what we'd propose is the key name would be something along the lines of module name / revision / the data store version, or something like that. So you'd put that into the key if you needed it. And in terms of that set of modules, so you list it under here, the entire set of modules that support on the device, and then you have a module set or actually a list of module sets that build subsets of those modules into particular schemas. So whereas you needed separate schema for each data store, you can build one or more module sets using that. And then for each data store, you report which module set is associated with that. So in the mainline case, you'd expect to have one list of modules. You define one module set that has all the modules that are being implemented. And then the data store would reference that single module set. So you'd have entries in the data stores for conventional, startup, candidate, running that would all point to the same module set, and so would operational. If you had deviations that differed between the data stores, then at that point, all your modules are listed with multiple entries potentially for the same module. You would then have two module sets. You'd have one for maybe the conventional data stores and a separate one for operational, and then the data stores would actually reference those two separate module sets. So this covers the requirements, but potentially is more complex for clients to deal with. So the proposed simplified version of this, and there's two simplifications that are happening here. One is that I've split out the list of modules that you implement against the list of modules that are import only. So given that a server can only implement a single revision of a module, then that list can now be listed by the module name, and the revision becomes simplified because it's optional as it is in the schema, and the data type can then be simplified as well. And separately from that, you have also the import-only module list. Now, because you can import multiple revisions of different modules, then you have to keep the name revision key there, effectively. But I think actually it feels to me that the more interesting list of modules that has actually been reported here is the list of implemented modules. I think that's what a device cares about more so than the imported list. Then again, by simplifying the name of the modules list, it allows us to have, it allows like the deviations just to have a simpler reference back to the name of that deviation. And then the other two things we have here is this not implemented leaf list and a not implemented leaf list under the features. So this is to say that for a given module, you choosing not to implement it in some data stores. So the default case you'd expect that not implemented in leaf list to be empty if you implemented it in all data stores. And again, if you had a feature that was enabled in all data stores, then you would again have an empty, not implemented leaf list. Lada.
I have one question. Is this structure extensible enough in terms of incorporating other data stores that may have really significantly different schema than these NMDA data stores?
So I think that's the trade-off, effectively, in terms of if you have one list here, then it's a compromise. The one change that I think we might consider making on top of this is the moment you've got this single not implemented in list, I wonder if that should be a choice statement that either lists the ones it is implemented in or not implemented in. So,
but actually, I think that in the version that you are going to show next, where we have really a list of schemas, then it would be easily possible to have some schema that is this NMDA schema, which is what we have here, and then have the possibility to define other schemas along that can be assigned somehow to other data stores that appear in this data store list. So.
Okay.
Benoit Claes speaking as a contributor. Have you been thinking about a way to export from a server what are the full list of supportable Yang models? I mean by that, if you would enable a license, if you would have all the line cards, etc. I don't specifically want to have it in there, but is there a way to group things that we could, maybe in a different Yang module or somewhere tell this device does support those modules now? But assuming you have the right license, assuming you do the right thing, you would have way more.
So this version, no. The next version I'm about to present, then almost certainly yes. So if I go on to move the next slide.
Kent Watson as a contributor. Going back to yesterday's discussion, NetMod working group, I'm wondering if this would be extensible to supporting the handling revisions, SEMVer. I see here you have the revision as a key field, and also you said earlier that currently there's an assumption that you can only have a single instance of implemented at a time. Both of those are no longer true. I wouldn't want to hold up this work for that, but it'd be nice to see if this was not at least constraining us from having this flexibility in the future.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think we're not, that sort of question wasn't actually closed, was it, as to whether a server could implement multiple versions of a module? I think it was questionable as to whether that should be allowed or not.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. I think for each SEMVer version, we should have one date-based version. So that would just be an additional leaf here in this schema, in my view.
Okay. So this is the final proposed extension to this, and so the text in purple here is an augmentation. So that wouldn't be directly in Yang library. That would be an augmentation by schema mount. So the only change that's been made here is rather than having a single list of modules, you actually have separate lists. So at the top level, you define lists of schema, and each schema has a set of modules that's part of that schema. So when Benoit raised this issue or question about whether you wanted to do had different licensing or something like that, then certainly you could imagine that you could define multiple schema, and in terms of what licenses were turned on, you could say this is the set of modules that would be represented in that schema effectively. And the plan here is that in the case that you have if you have just a normal device that's only has one schema, so you're not using schema mount, then the expectation here is you would just have one well-known schema. You might call it like primary or default schema. So you'd have a well-defined name here of what the default schema would be. And for simple devices or normal devices, you'd expect it to only be one. And the expectation as to when you get more schema, the one that I was considering here in particular, was when schema mount comes along. So this effectively should have removed most of the requirement of what's in the schema mount Yang module. The one bit I hadn't closed on was the issue of the references to the URNs and namespaces. So I don't know if that needs to be covered. So any comments on whether this is better, simpler?
I would certainly support this last version, not only because it supports schema mount and it is basically aligned with what I proposed yesterday during the NetMod session, but I think also it's really more future-proof, because we know that in Yang, if we have a container, then it's really hard to make it a list if you want to do it. So even if we don't do anything else, this list means even if it has just one entry, it's still future-proof, and we can use it for different sets of modules due to licenses or for support of other data stores, of course, for support of schema mount. And so I think this really is a very minor change and shouldn't cost much to make it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think your comment you made earlier about if your schema for one of the data stores like IETF was very different, it might be nice, as you say, to actually define a separate schema for IETF and then have referenced that by the data store. Any other comments at all?
Martin from the Jabber, maybe it's just a mistake in the T3 diagram, but Martin comments that the data store is under the schema list.
Oh, yes.
So that probably should be outside.
Correct. Yes. Sorry. It's meant to be outside the schema list.
Okay, so no more questions or comments from the room. But from chair's perspective, I think currently the milestone is for the 3 drafts to be into working group last call December timeframe. Do we still feel that this is the case?
For working group last call, I think that's reasonable. I mean, I think this is the issue. If you closed on this, then I think that's reasonable.
Okay. Great. Hi, I'm Kent, as a contributor, presenting the Zero Touch draft. Okay, great. And the clicker works as well. Okay, some updates since 99. First and foremost, we reverted back to the device always sending its IDEV ID certificate to the Bootstrap server, even when it doesn't trust the Bootstrap server. The reason for doing this was it was felt that from a security perspective, it was better for the device to give its identity to a potentially bad Bootstrap server than it would be for the Bootstrap server to give the device-specific configuration to a potentially spoofed device. This is called out in the security considerations section, so I'm sure it'll be looked at carefully by sector when they do their review. Secondly, we moved the content from, it was previously defined as a hierarchy of data accessible protocol nodes, protocol accessible nodes in the tree, and that got moved into an RPC called get bootstrap data. In that RPC, we added a parameter, a flag called untrusted connection. So this is an ability for the device to alert the Bootstrap server that it doesn't trust the Bootstrap server, that it is the scenario where it's blindly accepting the Bootstrap server's TLS server certificate. And therefore, the only way the device would accept or be able to process the data the Bootstrap server returned was for that data to either be signed or for it to be unsigned redirect information. So we always have this provision that redirect information does not have to be signed. We did add per Martin's review, another module called the IETF Zero Touch Device module. It is a standards-based module, so it can be implemented, but it's more exemplary in that it provides a mechanism for devices to have a flag called enabled, whether or not the Zero Touch is, the service is enabled. By default, it would be enabled, and then presumably through the bootstrapping mechanism, it would download a configuration that would disable it or delete it, since the default is disabled. So if it's not existing, it would be disabled. And then lastly, we added some must and mandatory expressions based on some reviews we received. Okay, so primary, couple last call comments that we received. First was that the redirect information needs to support returning partial certificate chains rather than just a single root certificate to support deployments using public CAs. This actually came from an operator that is using a public CA, not necessarily the one on the screen. And so from that public CA, they were issued a server certificate, but through the mechanisms, they could only put the public CA certificate, the root certificate. And the reason why is because the tools that they were being used, not all tools support the notion of partial certificate chain verification. OpenSSL supports it, but not all tools do. So what we need to be able to support is for the server that when it's returning the redirect information to provide that partial chain. This would be the red box at the top. So the trust anchor, if you will, is not, we're crossing out the binary. The binary actually represents an X509 certificate. So it's becoming a PKCS7, which is actually just containing the partial chain of certificates. And then, of course, in the blue box below is what when you're making the TLS connection to the Bootstrap server and it's doing the handshake, the certificate chain that's in the blue box would be what the TLS server would return. And therefore, then the entire chain can be resolved and complete certificate path verification can be performed. Okay, so this is the from the last call comment. The only comment I want to make to this is we're using a type called PKCS7. In the next presentation on the key store draft, you'll see that there's a suggestion that we might want to define another Yang module called something along the lines of IETF crypto types. So this is in the line of Yang types and INET types, so something called crypto types, which might define something called PKCS7. So it might be interesting to do that and then have this draft reference that type rather than define its own type that does exactly the same thing. Second comment, which was posted to the list, this is actually from the social. On Sunday night, we were my co-authors and I were talking to the DHC working group chair, and it was there stated that we should be very careful about the must that was in the definition of the DHCP option, that it suggested, so the DHC option currently is specifying allowable URI contents and error handling that can be improved. The proposal is to remove the must in the URI description so that there's no implication of server-side processing. What we've been told is that whenever GHCP options go for review, they inevitably get kicked back if there's any implication that there's a requirement for server-side processing. So we wanted to eliminate that so we don't have that problem. And then to accommodate that, we then added additional language to cover how clients handle errors when processing lists of URIs. So, we kind of go over the fact that the URI has to be of a certain structure, and if it's not of that structure, then, parts of it can throw away, and other parts, if they're there, then it has to skip over that entire URI and as if it weren't present in the first place. So again, that full proposal was sent to the list. We view this and actually even the previous comment as somewhat editorial comments. So here we are on the final stretch. All last call comments have been addressed on list. It seems that a simple draft update is all that's needed now before being forwarded to ISG for consideration. And that's even if we wanted to adopt this IETF crypto types module, if we wanted to introduce a normative reference to that, it's just adding of an import statement and referencing that type rather than a type that's embedded into the module itself. So that's effectively an editorial change of sorts. I don't think it would trigger the need for another last call. Of course, it would hold up ISG processing until all the references could be resolved, but that wouldn't hold up this working group. So with that, are there any final questions or comments or concerns?
So, Chair comment. I know this document has gone through multiple rounds of discussions and has cumulatively picked up votes of support to go into last call. Of course, every time there were a few more comments to be addressed. Do you believe at this point that the draft is ready with all the last set of comments, questions that people might have?
I do. Again, I just believe that there's these final editorial level changes that could be made as effectively last call updates. I don't think they're technical. They are a little bit technical, but not to this threshold of needing to trigger another last call, I don't think. But yes, I believe we're ready with this draft.
Okay, then the question is for the room here. Does anyone have any objections for moving this draft past last call at this point? All right, I will observe that there were no objections in the room.
Okay, our next set of drafts are the key store and friends drafts. So one presentation to cover them all. Recap, there was a last call, it was unsuccessful. There was only one review from Jürgen, thanks Jürgen. It was a doozy. In fact, it was calling for a major restructuring of the modules, which we'll get into in just a little bit here. In fact, I think it was because of his review calling for that major restructuring and there weren't any other reviews. Anyway, so for the key store draft, I'm not going to go over them all, but the most significant update was moving of the keys from and their associated certificates from being protocol accessible nodes to groupings. The groupings themselves are still defined inside this key store module, and then are being used by both the TLS client server and the SSH client server modules. And I actually, this does make sense, I believe, because now as Jürgen pointed out, that if you actually look to implementations, no one is actually having a key store where they're storing their private keys for SSH and TLS. So while we were trying to introduce an abstraction that seemed to make sense, it would be ideal, it actually didn't map to reality, to current implementation. So I think this is a good change. However, in italic here, you can see, does it mean that we need to rename the module since it actually no longer stores any keys, right? And the most significant, it's actually somewhat a rhetorical question, right? I mean, can't have a module called a key store module if there's no keys in it. And you might be wondering, well, what should we call it? Well, if you look to the next bullet point, the most significant non-update is defining reusable crypto types. This is what I mentioned in the previous presentation. A module, for instance, called IETF crypto types that would define these would be helpful. And also there was a discussion about moving algorithmic identities into another module. Where would we put those identities? I mean, we wouldn't put them into a module called crypto types because that's, I think, only supposed to have types or type defs in them, not identities. So then maybe we'd have a more generic module called something like IETF crypto, which would have both type defs and identities. So, I mean, that's not necessarily answering the question of what the name of this module should be, but it is sort of, suggesting that we should move some of this information out of this module into others. For the SSH and TLS client server drafts, the most significant update was the inlining of those keys. So it's using the aforementioned groupings. That also it's been updated to use those type defs around leaf refs to the common key store paths. This is one of the comments that were made before. The fallout of that, of course, is that the leaf refs are no longer visible in the tree diagrams. So from a readability perspective, I think you may or may not think this is better, but it's okay. And lastly, we removed compression algorithms, and this is because Gary, or my co-author, didn't feel like there was enough commonality across vendors to support the configuration of compression algorithms, and can be added in a future date. For the NetConf and RESTconf client server drafts, the most significant update is that now there are containers in addition to groupings for both the client and server modules. So we've always had the groupings, but Jürgen felt it was important to have containers as well. I continue to maintain, the server container does make sense, I understand, but the client container I never really understood because I feel that the application itself would probably embed the client grouping into its own configuration model, and that would be the container that's being used, not a global container. But it's okay, because when the module is being implemented, it doesn't have to, the conformance type doesn't have to be its implement. It could just be there for for the access to the groupings. Comment.
Rob Wilton, a quick clarification question. Are the containers inside the groupings?
No. The containers are top-level containers that are using the groupings.
Oh, fine. Okay.
So yeah, if you look at the Yang module, you'll see a container. It's like 3 lines. It just uses grouping with a description statement.
Okay.
And then lastly, there's been several additional must and mandatory statements added. This is a testament to the depth of reviews. I mean, these were actually rather deep, low-level. You had to follow a chain of groupings to try to realize that they sometimes it wasn't the case that a thing had to be present or not present. So it was actually a very good review that was received that resulted in the addition of these must and mandatory statements. So finally, most of the action is in a key store module right now, but it's having a ripple effect to all the other modules. In my view, the TLS and SSH, the NetConf and RESTconf, all those client server modules are effectively done the comments aren't really being there. The comments are all in the key store module. So we do need to focus on that. As mentioned, there may be a need to do some additional refactoring in the key store module. But we also need to be aware of the fact that there are a number of dependencies lining up to these. I was actually surprised the other day, Benoit presented a dependency map, and it showed there's 8 or 9 other drafts that were depending on mostly the TLS client server modules. So we do need to get these modules done soon. I don't want to hold up the work for much longer. Comment?
Jürgen comments on Jabber. If a client container is useless, we should not have it. I know that LMAP needs client configuration. If the conclusion is that generic client container is useless, then LMAP has to define its client container. I can go both ways.
Okay. So I think we'll follow up on that on the list. Any final questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Thank you. Yeah.
It's going to stay low, I guess. Hi, I'm Eric Voigt, and I'm the presenter on behalf of a lot of the people who've been working on the subscription set of drafts. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know that there's a bunch of people who have been working in a design team in the previous iteration when you had their first 4 drafts, people like Ballas and others. We also have a bunch of new people who have joined, and you're going to see some of their drafts at the end of the optional section. This is really just to thank the people who've been working on this for a while. Now, this is the second hackathon. This is just doing a report out on what the hackathon results were from last weekend. In IETF 99, we did a event where we had 2 different vendors, and we tended to interrupt. This time we did a SACM plus telemetry with Yang Push hackathon element, and we had participation from SACM, NetConf, and the core working group, and we ended up winning the best cross working group collaboration. I think that's pretty cool. Since then, we've seen other working groups who are interested. I2NSF, we saw slides from them who want to go ahead and start using Yang Push, and we also have people here from DTN who are interested in Yang Push. So it seems to be getting some traction, and the fact that we're using a production system to do and feed information to another working group is pretty cool. Now there's a whole bunch of drafts, and it's easy to quail under the set of them, so I'm going to try to break it down. The ones on the left are the ones I'm going to be talking about here, and then I'm going to pass it off to other people who have different drafts, and they'll go through them. Majority of those are not adopted. The first one is adopted, and you'll hear from each of the authors there. Again, I'm speaking to give you an overview of the top 5 on the left. The one other draft, which Kent requested a while ago, was a overview draft, and if you want to get an idea of what the drafts are, see the draft Voigt NetConf subscription and notification overview. The goal there is just to give people an easy entry to what they are, and it's intended as an entry point. Even if it's not adopted, it gets people some access. Now, you've seen this slide before in earlier versions. This just adds the new adopted drafts and the functions that are supported. So this is just really color codes what's in subscribe notifications, what's in Yang Push, what's in the different transport drafts. And so I'm going to kind of not go in depth here because we'll be talking about the deltas in the different slides. So subscribe notifications. Probably the most significant stuff on the mailing list has been the changes, the draft driven by some excellent comments from many people in the working group on subscribe notifications. There have been a number of fairly good changes. For example, we had things become features that were originally mandatory. that's useful for even people over in the core working group where they are not going to need IoT, is not going to be needing that kind of stuff. We returned to some of the earlier things that we had earlier drafts. We had a return to a string for a stream, which were in earlier drafts. We returned there. We had explicit filter site typing in our earlier drafts. We went back and then we returned to that. There's also some excellent comments that were made on 5277 and use for one-way notifications, and we clarified that as well. So there's a whole bunch of cleanup changes. The structure of the document stays fairly consistent, but now it is definitely more readable and probably more applicable than before the review. Now, there are 3 issues that are open with subscribe notifications, and we're trying to look at ways of closing them. So what I'm going to try to do is, I don't know how you want to do this, like do a hum poll or just sort of raise the hands, but at least address potentials. This is not definitive, but at least gets an idea on the 3 issues, and if people in the room have a preference for one or the other. For the most part, I don't really have a strong preference for the ones that are still open. It can go either way, but we just got to figure out what we want to do as a community.
So we will poll the room after each of these slides.
You will?
We
Okay.
will, yes.
Okay. Excellent. So the first question really is, will the transport vary for different receivers of a notification? And why would people want to do that? Well, let's say you are using HTTP 1.1 and you have an upgrade and you do an HTTP 2 transport. Do you have to actually create a new subscription and then manually change everybody over to the new subscription, or can you just add the new transport to that receiver? So there's value in some cases of having an extra configured, an extra transport for a receiver rather than a transport for the whole subscription. Now, so the current draft has that as a benefit, but it is also possible to not allow transport to vary by subscription. This makes for a simpler model, but it does have extra complexities on the application side. And I did send a preview of this issue out to people on the list. There have been 1 or 2 emails back on it. And what we're trying to do is just get an idea of whether people are fine with the receiver varying, the transport varying by receiver, or if they want to make sure that that you have a different subscription and only one transport for a receiver.
Any comments?
Vote preference, people care. I mean, okay, good. Votes are good.
I just want to make sure people have their comments before we. Yeah.
Rob Wilson, so my preference is keep it simple. I mean, if there's a choice here and there's no strongly clear benefit that's pushing for the more complicated one, go for the simpler model. You can always make it complicated again later.
Yep.
Yeah, we have do the deeply review and send the comments in the mirror list. And all the issues have confirmed and all fixed. Now we have confirmed in the mirror list.
Walid Abdel from Nokia. I would go with the option of keeping it simple as well.
All right. Awesome. I love closure if people are there. I know that Martin has expressed an issue of having both the transport and the encoding be the same. So if we go to the simpler model and we say configured, another comment?
Martin on Jabber says, I'm fine with varying per receiver, but the issue is around transport encoding. In my opinion, they go together.
And if we follow the simple model, they'll go together. So it looks like we go with the no, and we move from the current draft to the no draft, and we'll make that update.
Okay, so I don't think we need a hum for this. We don't.
Doesn't seem
Okay.
like it. Unless anybody really wants to fight the other one. No, please don't. It's good to be done, at least for now. All right, second issue, and this is kind of a general one that we're the first implementer of, and I find this one fascinating. The question is, how do you represent source VRF for configured subscription? Yes, we're the first people, I guess, that are going to be doing a leaf ref to the network instance model where they have effectively the identifier for a VRF, but it requires that you have schema mount. And don't get me wrong, I love schema mount, but I can imagine that IoT people don't want to have to have an import dependency on schema mount if for an optional leaf ref. So the question is, the current draft currently has string, and you can populate it with the same field that would be used as a leaf ref, but do we want to actually explicitly make a link to a leaf ref to a model that has schema mount? So again, this really is an issue which probably should be addressed with guidance by the people over doing the network instance model, but I guess the current draft says, why not just populate it with the name that would be same as the leaf ref? And I'd like to see if people have opinions on this one as well.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco, my preference is option 3. So effectively, I've emailed you on the ALIS on this, and I think the solution is you do use a leaf ref, but you put it under a feature statement, And it might be good if the network instance model defined a feature for VRF capability effectively in its own, maybe a separate module. So you could have dependency on that, if feature statement, but not have a dependency on schema mount directly and the network instance model. Because I think it's good for all these models that might work with VRFs or not. They should have a looser dependency than they currently have.
Yes. And this is a fascinating issue for overall general how does Yang get managed, because we have a belief that probably the format of another model is the same, and do we have the ability to influence how that other model should be structured or not? And at this point, I've been assuming we don't, but if we can get that change, if we can't get the change, what do we do? And if we can get the change, it probably we can adopt that. That'd be great if we could adopt that.
I like offer the fourth option. Actually, in that Yang model, we use identity to.
Can you repeat your name, please?
My name is Qing Wu from Huawei. Yeah, we face a similar situation. In actually, we have a draft net Yang model we propose in OPSWG. We actually think net instance model is not stable enough. So we instead of use net instance, we actually use identity to represent worth. So this is another option we use.
And this is another reason why we eventually did string, because we didn't see it being stable for the other side. And there is that issue that if we populate the string, can we use that and match it to either the identity or the network instance or maybe some other model from another group? String does have the most flexibility with what you're going to be doing under comparison to other places, which is one of the reasons the current draft does have string. So I think my general preference is string because of all those issues, because I'm assuming we don't have the ability to change the network instance model or determine where it goes. I don't know if others are willing to comment on this topic.
So Rob Wilton, did you mention before that all the other models that have this sort of issue are using leaf refs? Is that?
No, I don't know if any other, I mean, the network instance model is fairly new. I don't know others that are actually referring to it yet. There might be some, but I don't know.
Okay.
Kent, as a contributor, Lou told me yesterday that all of the routing area working group is moving to using the network instance.
Right.
I think there might be 6 or 7 different models that are currently having leaf refs to
Awesome.
network instance.
But there is one interesting issue here, because the routing group does have a very deep understanding of routing, and they have more reason to be there versus a management system that just wants to kind of casually have a chance to mention and match to VRF. So the need for the deep embedding in the routing working group will be higher than the general case of people who say, oh, maybe I want a VRF, and then they have the linkage. So I think that when I was thinking about it, I was talking about the casual users who might want a VRF option, and that I have not seen outside.
So you do mention that the name would be the same as in the leaf ref.
Exactly.
But what is the validation in the model to make sure that that is indeed the case?
Exactly. That's the problem. That's the issue, is that you have to do a validation not via leaf ref. I mean, that's the issue.
So
And this is
at the minimum, I would say that validation, that must statement or whatever should exist in the model.
If it's a must statement, then must you also import the other model that has the, so it effectively does the same thing. Yeah. I'd actually almost changed the network instance model to be the string with that reference, but the ultimate issue is you're still importing and getting all the baggage, which many people aren't going to want.
Martin Ungeber says he agrees with Rob's proposal.
Oh, I would agree with it too if they do it. I mean, that means they have to change.
So Rob Wilton, so even if they don't do it, then the next best choice is to define the feature in this module of VRF support required, and then make the leaf conditional on that feature.
And if we make it conditional, we still have the import. So there will be still some dependency, but it won't be quite the same.
It'd be a compile time.
It'll be a compile time
not
dependency.
a runtime dependency. So
I think that, if nothing else, we can take it to them to say, that there should be some guidance on how to do this. And if everybody in the whole world has to have a feature for VRF, we're actually mandating a fairly large dependency across all the models that would have there. All of a sudden, we have to, any leaf ref is going to become a feature, and that's going to proliferate through our whole modeling environment.
That just encourages them to define the feature.
Yes, I wish they would. Yeah. Time for, this is the perfect place. We're talking your feature capability right now. All right.
The leaf ref to the network instance. Yeah, all right. So I know I said earlier that we'd pull for the various options, but I think here we also, there's like options 3 and 4 that have come up. And
we can do it on the mailing list. In the end, I just want to close.
Right.
I'll salute whatever, but I do think that the issue of having a dependency is not pretty, and it's really beyond this model.
Well, I agree. And what you said earlier about, the routing people are definitely, their models, of course, it'd be comfortable and natural for them to have the network instance model there, whereas, a controller type application maybe wouldn't necessarily have it there. So
absolutely.
it creates, maybe an unnecessary dependency. But so I'm sympathetic to this, but I think we probably need to take that to the list also, to try to figure out what is the impact, to how many applications or.
Yeah, VRFs are going to be everywhere. Anybody who says, oh, maybe I want a VRF, all of a sudden has a very large set of baggage, and it's not pretty.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. I would like to separate actually the problems of having or not having a feature is valid both for string and leaf refs, and then string or leaf ref is a second question.
All right, we'll take it to the list. I don't think we have to vote, but the point is that we had to close, and we can't just tell, we just can't tell Lou what to do.
Jürgen,
So Lou, Martin and Robert agreed on your model for what to do.
Jürgen asks, what is the cost of the import in running code? And Martin adds, first he says, agree, we should ask for guidance from routing working group, and then he says, I also don't understand the dependency issue. The fact that there is a dependency, the fact is that there is a dependency if you need a VRF.
Lou Berger, that was actually going to be my question. Is this something that you're trying to deal with for the server limitation or a client limitation?
This is for the push server, but even IoT devices are talking about Yang push. We have some people in here from IoT, and because the Yang model itself has that reference, and they might not care to have the VRF, the import dependency exists to the schema mount.
So why don't, in your model, make the ability to reference a VRF a feature?
We were talking about that as an option. We still have some of that, but even if we do that, we have other people who don't care still having to do the import.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have a feature that is, yeah, I guess you would still do the import even if it's just a feature that you're not implementing.
Yes, and that's the problem.
So most of the tool sets at compile time require the import, even if it's a dummy.
And that's what really got me going, and that is a thing that I think.
Yeah, but that's just the compile time on your tooling. That's not going to show up on the actual server. The server won't need to have support. Your development tools will need to have support. There's a big difference.
If you make it a feature, yes. So we're saying
no. If you make it a feature,
yeah. If we make it a feature, then we're pretty much saying that many things that are references, which should probably be done the same way across all the models that kind of need VRF sometimes.
So if you're building a box and you want to support network instances, you're going to have support for it, and you're going to want to be able to reference it, so you'll use the feature that has the VRF, that points to the VRF.
Exactly.
Anyway, if you're building a box that doesn't use VRFs, you just won't import that. You won't implement that feature, but that feature can be your reference in your model.
All right, we have I totally agree. Let's keep this one on the list. I think that the proposal Rob has is one that we should probably revisit on the list because it does address.
It doesn't really make sense to me that if you are supporting a VRF, a network instance, which is you're supporting a module whose sole purpose is VRF and VSIs, to have defined in it a feature that allows you not to support VRFs and VSIs. That seems to be really foolish. Why would why would we want to allow people to implement something that doesn't support the main function that's defined in it? This is a side function for you. It's a feature for you that's optional.
It is a feature. I'm hoping that I'm willing to go either way. I'm just trying to make sure the guidance is there, that people kind of implement feature and do it the same way everywhere.
So I agree you're breaking ground. I think you should, from my standpoint, it should be a feature in yours, and you should set that pattern for modules that want to reference, and that it makes sense that sometimes they reference VRFs and sometimes they don't. That sounds like a feature in that model.
I'll salute it. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Martin says, you can also augment the VRF leaf from a separate, very small module to avoid the import. And Jürgen says, the import is irrelevant for the code on the IoT device. And Martin replies, but I agree with the compile time comments. This shouldn't be a problem.
Right. So it sounds like we do feature and we do leaf ref, and people are okay.
Well, sorry, Kent, as a contributor, what Martin was saying was you could do an augment. So it'd be this is another option instead of doing a feature. And I'll say that's the proposal that we're using in the TLS client, SSH client server drafts.
As an augment as a separate model to begin with?
Well, yeah, we simply aren't defining support for VRFs initially. And with the assumption that future documents will add in the VRFs or augment in the VRFs as needed.
Well, I'd rather just keep it in there. People are having this problem already today. This is something that people are hitting. So I think it's just probably best to put it in there and make it easy.
I'm not sure I understand really the proposal by Rob. So even if the feature is not supported, then the device needs the string, right? So it's like a choice, either or, so that you would need maybe to have some choice already in the original code, and then maybe augment this leaf ref into it under a different.
They're kind of parallel. We still can do a leaf ref. The point Rob was making in his earlier thing is that if they change their model, then we wouldn't have to worry about schema mount import necessarily. So they could both be made to work. All right, we have to really close this because we have a number of other topics, but it looks like we're to the guts of an answer.
Actually, I'd like to continue the conversation. We have some extra time, please.
Oh, we have extra time?
Yeah.
Awesome. I think basically the base issue is that we don't have a feature on the import statement itself, right? That would solve that.
So I like the augment solution if use of a feature in the model that sometimes references VRFs turns out to be a real problem. But I'm not sure I understand the problem, because it seems to me that it's a development time, just compilation reference check, as opposed to actually having to do any extra code. Because you don't really have to, the device doesn't really have to implement schema mount. It just has to be able to compile this feature that it's not using. And perhaps I'm missing something, which is quite possible. But it doesn't sound like it's that complex.
There's some compile time tooling complexities. Again, they don't overwhelm
Right,
the
but it's
fact that
not
we
device complexity. It's not like we're forcing a device
Agreed.
or a client to support schema mount.
Agreed. Yes. All right, so it looks like we have the guts of the solution there. And we'll try to write it up. Now, there's one other topic that we actually declared rough consensus on. There are a lot of people who chimed in on string or integer for subscription ID. And while I showed 2 options here, just like all the other issues, there's always 4 options, 5 options. So I showed the 2 most different ones. One is to use an integer to avoid collisions and reuse. The other one that had the most, difference was using string for configuration, integer for updates. That wasn't the the only way to do it. There was another model that Robert was talking about, where you had a combination between the 2, where you still had some issues. In the end, I think the issue has worked fairly well on the list, and even though not everybody had the answer they wanted, the rough consensus out there was to use the integer one. right, so moving on to Yang Push, we have version 11 out there. Based on the revised data stores catching up, we went ahead and integrated that model. We also had the explicit subtyping that we had in version 0 to 5. We returned that based on comments to get rid of the generalization we had attempted. Scrubbed a lot of examples based on Ballas's comments. We had the resync on-change RPC that got inserted. And the multi-line card issue that we were originally putting in there, we deferred that to another draft. You're going to see draft Zal. So you're going to see more about that one in a future issue. Now, there's still, one thing about NMDA compliant structures. I was talking to Alex, and we are willing to go ahead and have a NMDA model that we want to be able to compare side to side with the current model early December at the latest. And we're hoping to get ready for a working group last call, so we can, at the working group last call, look at the current model and the NDA model just to do a side-by-side comparison and let the working group kind of see what the choices are and the differences are. So that's where we are with the Yang Push. Any changes or questions on Yang Push?
So you said what the differences are. As if there's a choice. I think we have to come out with an NMDA compliant version of this module, don't we?
And we'll have the NMDA compliant version there. I think it's not explicit must. We were there early enough where NMDA kind of caught up to us, and it is a should, but we will do it. No, we're not saying we're not going to do it. We are going to do it.
Okay.
I think it's fine. Very busy. I mean, we will release it with the NMDA combined version, and the difference can be made by just looking at the previous draft, essentially.
Yeah. But it's good to actually get all the issues down and then convert, because we've been doing it in the one way the whole time. It makes easier continuity. All right, event notifications, updates based on 99. Honestly, yeah.
So Tim Carey-Minoki, I just wanted to make sure, because we were saying this in NetMod before, but there'll still be a state version of this thing, right?
There's definitely state.
No, I mean a state version like we do with the appendix. Will there be a state version of the model as part of the appendix? I think that's what we kind of decided on when we were trying to bring this out to the communities. Because I know there's going to be some modules some implementations, some solutions that will be, still have the separate state trees for a while, and so I just wanted to make sure that we're still trying to do that.
So I think, just to clarify, I think that's true for models that have been released or are implemented. I guess in this case, the question is, are there existing implementations that would be impacted if we were to either deprecate or collapse the state part of the model?
So we're saying, and maybe I want to make sure I understand this, is that modules that have not reached RFC status, right, won't have a state version of it?
No, it's not that they won't have. It's just we have some flexibility as to whether or not we will do it. It was, I think in the guidelines, it said that based on market demand or something along these lines. So, if it turns out that this is a module or feature that's needed to be implemented on non-NMDA compliant servers, then that would be the reason for us to go ahead and doing the dash state. But I think probably more generally speaking, that we should defer, we probably should do the dash state versions in general, unless there's like an overwhelming reason not to do it.
I would hope so, because it's, particularly these ones are getting kind of close, right? That you would look at that, because we certainly would want to adopt the feature, but sometimes it's going to be a little bit longer before you can get into that MNDA, because they got to change their entire solution sets, right? Yeah. So my preference would be that you would create state versions for a period of time, as you said, as the market deals with it.
Right.
Can I add one thing? What's one of the benefits of actually doing the conversion late, because we already had the non-NDA version. So by having them there, we have a choice by going down this path versus doing a shift and then going back and forth. So we'll have something that's pretty close. Plus we have implementations out there. There's several open source implementations of this. It's already documented. There's production, production code. So we still have it, but at least there's no process requirement. I'm committing here that we'll have the two models.
Well, I appreciate that because it'll make it easier for adoption in various bodies that haven't switched over yet, right?
So we'll commit to having both versions available side by side. And this is one of the reasons we're doing it.
Yeah, the stage version is the one that we currently have, essentially.
Yeah, makes life easy. All right, so NetConf event notifications. There's a big set of changes on here. Basically, I always cared more about HTTP2, but I had to pick up NetConf in order to sort of bring this draft up to last call quality. So we did a whole bunch of changes, moving the text and putting all the normative text up front in only pages 2.4. We removed the JSON, we put in the call home text, and moved all the examples to the appendix, including scrubbing them and learning how all that works for NetConf. So I think that there's a lot of changes and a lot of fixes from the last. We've done our best cut. Comments are very appreciated and welcomed for sure. Now, I guess we can take at least a status check. On the email list, we had said that there's 3 drafts. Oh, do you have a comment?
Walid Al-Book from Nokia. Just one minor comment on the NetConf event notifications. Sure. I think the examples probably would need to be scrubbed one more time because there was a couple of places where one of them needs to match the latest model with the subscribe notifications. And then there was another place where it would still using get, which in another draft we say it's going to be obsoleted.
I love hearing that, hearing the deep review, because I mean, Ken taught me just a few days ago that there's a Yang lint to scrub these examples, and I didn't know that tool existed. So I've been playing with it manually and trying to scrub it, which is not a great idea, but that's what I had. So the fact that you've gone and done that look is comforting, and we'll make the changes. Just send them to the list. All right, so kind of work check. You know, Ken put out an email early saying we have 5 drafts. You know, we want to look at all of them, and I guess I stepped on his toes unintentionally or intentionally, however you want to do it. But I see the money being in the existing implementations. Right now, people have implementations. They want Yang push, they want the data store subscription, and the custom subscription event streams as a package because that's what you see in implementations. So it's where the money is. I don't know if we address it now or later, but there is a recommendation, at least from the authors, to say this is the right grouping because this is the one that matches to what the market seems to care and have the ability to execute on right now. Yeah.
Daniel Eriksson. I was part of this group, and I think these 3 are good enough for work group last call. I'm quite happy with them, and I definitely see these 3 as the first one. So based on this, you can make something work. Now, UDP and HTTP and all the others are useful, but not as urgent.
Okay, so I think there's a few questions here. You know, what is the package of drafts we might take to the working group last call? That particular question, I'd like to wait until after you've presented the full set of drafts.
That's fine.
The second being is when might we take them to the last call, assuming this is the set that we took. Already, I think you said that there's updates that need to be made on both the subscribe notifications and Yang push. And as far as event notifications goes, I believe there's also some examples. Yeah, the examples and the normative text. So there's some. They're not ready. They're not ready immediately. Yeah, I think those are the 2 things. And and then the last thing is that we'll wait until the end of after you present to do this.
So give us 2 weeks. We'll get it in. All right. So other issues, other topics. NetConf, RESTconf notif. There were a couple technical issues and other things that, even though I started, this was probably one of my first drafts in the space, the HTTP2 and then RESTconf, there are complexities that we found. As you guys who have been here a lot know, I've always asked, can we have help with gRPC? We never really got the help consistently. And there are some issues, not really with this draft, but with RESTconf overall with gRPC, in that gRPC is more of a match. RESTconf uses get, not post. gRPC uses post. So we never really got the deployment guidance that we were looking for to get that through. There's a new draft or a new problem statement on CoAP transfer, and you'll hear about that later. So the idea of Yang push for CoAP also means that we have another draft in the general space. What's the actual division? The one that really got me going, and the one that I think is the most important to me, is the issue with DDoS protection. there's a dependency of when you have a configured subscription to stop DDoS on sending a subscription started message, which then has an OK reply. You don't send the updates until after you receive that OK. But do you send the updates with the current notification or for the new notification messages draft? There's nothing there that says it. If we wait, and because nobody's asking for this draft, if we wait for the subscribed, with the notification messages, then we can just mandate everybody using HTTP2 uses the new notification message, and we don't have that extra complexity. So my big technical issue is I'd love to solve the DDoS issue, and this waiting for the new notification messages is a way to do it. No implementations yet, and at least the recommendation is make it concurrent with notification messages. For notification messages, we have updated and put the text in. There's been, that was new as of a very recent IETF. Yang data was an issue that came up in the net mod working group, and we're hoping to go ahead and sync with what's going on there. There's an issue with how do you discover what the receiver can support, which technically we can do, but I think we have to work through. And there's fun dialogues coming in with the core guys and the guys over in I2RS and SACM on doing signatures and attestation and other ways of validating it. So we're going to have some good discussions there. So this is going to take a little time to work through in order to get it right, and that's where we are with that draft.
Martin asks, probably regarding the previous slide, what transports have people implemented?
Well, we have NetConf in Cisco's production release XE16.6, so you can subscribe, and that's what we used in the hackathon demos. There are open source implementations out there that are in Python and Java. Guys over at Huawei had a implementation they used at the last hackathon. So there's a number of implementations out there. And you worked with NetConf, right? I think you guys used NetConf in the hackathon with IETF99. Yes. Yeah, so they're NetConf as well. All right, so I think I got through most of the notification messages. I think the fun topics are going to come with signatures and attestation and others, so stay tuned for that. So that's that.
Great. So we have like 3 minutes until we get to the next presentation. So first, I would like to get some, the pulse from the room, the working group that's in the room. The first question I'd like to ask is to get a sense of how many people are in the room are active contributors to the design team that's been working on these drafts. So if you've been active on the design team, can you raise your hand, please? All right. The second question is for the whole room. How many people have read these drafts, the 3 drafts that we're talking about? And that includes the design team, so everyone. Okay, good. That's a good number. Thank you. And then finally, assuming that these issues are resolved, how many people believe that these drafts would be ready to go to working group last call? That's also a good number. Okay, good. And what timeline would you think that you'd be ready?
We could get all the changes in there other than the ones that are still open. Give us 2 weeks. We'll do it.
And of the issues that we discussed, of course, all of them have to be, the resolutions have to be confirmed on the list.
Yes, but we did get to the resolutions, which is awesome.
Good. Thank you. Next up, I think Walker. Good. You have the UDP and multiple. Hold on. No. Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. This topic is about the distributed data collection. Next, please. I can try it. Yeah. Firstly is here we extend the NetConf for distributed data collection, and there have one draft adopt as with 2 parts. One is for multi-stream originators. The other is for UDP pub channel. So as we discussed on the design team meeting, and we think it should be split two draft. So the one is keep UDP pub channel. The other one is for multi-stream originators. The firstly is UDP-based publication channel for streaming telemetry. Why UDP-based publishing channel? Firstly, the YAM push separates the management and control for our subscription from the transport that is used to actually stream and deliver the data. And currently for YAM push, already mentioned the existing transport, including NetConf, the RESTconf are TCP based. And there have some point we should concern. Firstly, data collector will suffer a lot of TCP connections from many line cards equipped on different devices. The second is as no connection state needs to be maintained, UDP encapsulation can be easily implemented by hardware, which will further improve the performance. And because of lightweight UDP encapsulation, high frequency and better transit performance can be achieved, which is important for streaming telemetry. And here is the solutions. At the left, the diagram, the solution will be two main parts. The below is for the message layer, and the upper one is for the content layer. For the message layer, there's three layers. First is UDP, and then for the security, DTLS, and then message header. For the DTLS will provide the reusable security and authorization function over UDP. And for the message header, we'll keep the important information before deserializing the notification, include for the encoding method like GPB, COBOL, JSON, XML, and the message generate ID, then timestamp and sequence number, maybe fragmentation. For some fragmentation, maybe keep an open issue. Maybe we can discuss in future. And maybe some other option for the extensibility. And then notification message. The notification message is the YAM push notification data itself. Maybe include the notification header. The notification header is defined in the other draft, which maybe Eric just now mentioned for the NetConf notification message, and then the encoded with the content. Then the next draft is for the multi-stream originators. Here, firstly, we begin with the two use cases. The use case one is for the device which is designed as a distributor for mainboard and multi-line card. If for multi-line card, all the data, as we know, all the data may be generated from the line cards. And if we collect all data from line cards, then aggregate with the mainboard. The mainboard may be easily become a bottleneck. So in this case, maybe let every line card can send the YAM push data or notification directly to the collector. Then the performance maybe become better. And the second use case is IoT data collection, like the COOP. I think for the mechanism for COOP, they have mentioned for pub-sub mechanism. Here, for every IoT node, we'll send the message, send the data to the border router, then assemble the data, then send the collector. But in the traditional device, like the router switch, if we assemble the data on the border router, maybe the CPU will go high because the router itself is focused on the its business, maybe for protocol. So here, if we send the data directly from the node to the collector, maybe better. Here is the solution suggested. Maybe though the solution is not the scope for this draft, just give a suggestion. Here, in this diagram, there are many two parts. One is for the collector, and then for the publisher. For the publisher, here I give two subnode for the one master node. Here, firstly, the subnode will register to the substring server on the master. Then the collector will negotiate with the substring server. Then and the collector subscriber send a subscriber message to the substring server to establish the subscription. And the subscription server will decide whether we will send the collector data distributedly or aggregate to master. If it decide to send the notification separately, distributedly, then the node will act as the publisher agent and send the notification directly to the receiver. Here is the issues being worked as firstly for subscription decomposition, keep track of resource and the associated publisher, make decision and decomposing the global subscription into multiple component subscriptions, and publication composition, compose the component notification into one. Subscription management, maybe we need to add some error code or some mechanism notification related to the subscription decomposition and component subscription, and then notifications and on subscription state changes. Each component subscription maintains its own subscription state and is responsible for sending its own OM notifications. There may be some other potential issues like the synchronization, like security, maybe some others. Next step is because this is the first Z0 version, so we encourage comments and suggestions. And should the work group adopt this draft?
Okay, sorry. There's two presentations here, and the first presentation is already a chartered working group item. I just want to, we don't have a milestone for it yet. What is the plans for when we would be able to move that document into working group Let's Go?
What? For the first one? For
the first one, UDP pub channel?
For the first one, the transport layer will be UDP.
Correct, but when might we be able to move that document into working group last call? What is your expectation?
What? Sorry.
We don't currently have a milestone for that document.
Yeah.
How long do you think it will take until it would be
You
ready?
mean for the first one? For
the first document, yes.
Maybe I think we will for the master. Maybe we can discuss for the design team. I'm not confirmed now. Right.
Okay, and then for the second document, this is not a chartered working document item, just as you mentioned. Also, it has not been mentioned. It hasn't been posted to the list. There's been no discussion on the list just yet. So I think it'd be premature to ask for working group adoption at this point. We need to have some discussion on the list first.
Yes.
Okay.
We should discuss them first. Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is Alex. Just one brief remark. Actually, the multiple stream originators was originally actually contained in the other draft, and also in the notification headers draft were also allusions to that. So basically, as part of it was pulled out because it was basically a separate, more general issue. So, but it's true we have not discussed this basically as an individual draft. The issue has been there actually for some time.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, yeah. Oh, 5 minutes, I think, yeah. Yes.
Great.
Okay. Hi. I'm Xufeng Liu from JPO. I'm here to talk a little about the problem statement of the generalized automation framework. So currently we have some related documents, 3 related documents here. One is the notification, YAM push, and the smart filters. Based on those already existing documents, we are trying to expand that. The objective is to make it more generalized from the existing trigger then send notification to a concept, event, condition, and action. So the event pretty much comes from existing triggers, from the YAM push, and the condition will cover some logic expression evaluated based on the data store state. And the action will go beyond the current simple notification and cover more actions. So such kind of event, condition, action triplet will fit into a policy framework, so to allow user to specify such kind of policy rules. And the generalized action will cover more beyond the simple notification which we have today. We also try to do the network reconfiguration, schedule, RPC, and even link some subtrees in the data store. So because this such kind of structure will fit in the framework, so we made a policy framework so then we can utilize some policy capabilities. So decompose the condition into smaller conditions and do the same for the action. Such kind of framework will bring us some benefit. So we can have more responsible network. We will be more scalable and more efficient, and so that we'll have more automation. So next step, we'll try to get feedback from the working group, and we can start work on some models on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. What's the next one? We're just at this point going. Oh, sorry. Question?
Yeah.
Please. Yes.
Comments. Frank Xia, Huawei. Sorry, I haven't yet read this draft, but I see your slides. I found that you mentioned the event condition action paradigm model for the policy design. So I have a question for you. I'm wondering if you know that there are existing work of the policy design in Super working group and in I2SF working group. We all use the ECA model. So I want to know what's your model relation with those existing work in other working groups. So I think we should, we need to be aligned each other, or there are some relation between them. We need to be clarified.
Yes, that's one possibility. We have evaluated the Super policy framework, and that's one option. But depend on how that model is going on, because as Bawan probably already know this, that working group is closed for now, so we may or may not use that framework.
In addition, a lot of Super policy work is still inherited and extended in the I2SF working group. We are very detailed information model about ECA model in our capability information model. So would you please to take a look at that draft, and I think we can sit together and discuss what is the relation between them, and maybe can we can at least yes. I think we can contribute to each other or something. Yeah, you can take a look.
Definitely.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. And is Henker co-op transfer? I think so.
Is this the one or the next one?
Maybe it's that one. This one. Oh, sorry, wrong one.
Right. So here, yeah, I'm trying to speak on behalf of Hank, but I'm not familiar with this slide. Okay. So we're trying to do the telemetry model and over not the NetConf, but we have another option here. We use the call-me. So he called it call-conf. It's pretty much call working groups equivalent, right? So then the purpose here is that of trying to have a more efficient transport, so that we're trying to make it in a more simple constrained environment, so that it can have binary YANG transfer, and we use that to certain device. So the subscription will go through the COPE and call-me, and then the configuration we will also use what we have here, the call home, and we're trying to utilize some features here and to do the bootstrapping capability here. And the problem statement that we have, this is also the problem statement draft. We're going to work on this so that we can complete the solution. Currently, the solution not complete the code. They have some kind of notification, but the mechanism is not at the feature as much as we have here. So we need to expand the existing YANG push mechanism to this environment. So we have identified some gaps. I need to do some median type for feature expression, and we need to do the COPE call home, and we also need to discover the mechanism for COPE-based solution. So the work also be introduced to the core working group. So we have collaboration there. Pretty much that's it.
So a question first is this solution only needed for telemetry, or is there a more general use of maybe binary encoding and
could be more general use, yes.
And you said this work was also being presented to the core working group?
That's right.
So is it something for the NetConf work? Are you just bringing it to our attention, or are you suggesting that there's a need for adoption down the road? Or
I'll answer that. I think that Hank was talking about having the adoption in that working group, and that's what they talked about there. But it's just a problem statement right now. In the end, the question of some of the mechanisms that are there being adopted in other places is a interesting question that I think the working groups will have to work through.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I was actually thinking that it probably should be in the core working group as opposed to this one. So, but
yeah,
good. Thank you. And now it's Alex, the last two presentations. And you have 1 extra minute. You're looking for smart filters.
Actually, the other one first.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, out of order. This one, yes, thank you. Okay, so that is okay. So basically, this is basically problem statement for smart filters for push updates. So this is basically another extension that builds on top of the YANG push subscription drafts and so forth that was listed also in the in the earlier overview. Basically, to give a little bit background and purpose of this, Yang push filters do allow clients to select which nodes to subscribe to. However, many monitoring applications need to have actually a little bit more. They would they are interested also particularly in values and, for instance, filtering things based on whether things are within the normal operating range or outside of that range, for instance. So, for instance, questions such as, has a critical range been reached, is utilization above a certain percentage, and so forth. Those are things that you would not be able to provide on the device, but basically by an application that processes the stream. Filter on values is currently not covered in Yang push. Reasons for this were to not needlessly stretch the implementation complexity. Also, in many cases, you would need to have additional things on top rather than just value-based filtering and so forth. And anyway, so therefore, basically, this is currently not addressed. And the smart filter problem statement here is a proposal to address this gap. And essentially transition also this way the simple updates to actually real events, basically that indicate conditions that are of interest. In terms of how it fits in with the other drafts, this is just very briefly the overview. Well, we went through these. Essentially, the smart filters are basically operating missing on top of or in conjunction with Yang push, and they also feed into any automation and so forth that you want to pursue. In terms of what would be included in the scope of smart and stateful filters, basically clearly filters based on values, so basically match filters, comparators, those sorts of items. Also certain selected stateful filters, such as threshold crossings, recent high watermarks, whether objects are generally in and out of filter conditions, and so forth. Those things are basically pretty much boilerplate or basically table stake things that you need to have for service assurance. In addition, and basically the proposal here is to focus on those. There are, of course, even smarter filters possible. One thing concerns aggregates, forming aggregates over time, things such as, for instance, simple statistical aggregation, computation of maxima averages, and so forth. We thought actually to keep it outside the scope. However, there's been some feedback to maybe also incorporate that. Things that we view as basically, well, not within this problem statement are more complex things such as aggregates across objects, full harmonification, or basically forming the equivalent of an expression and event map in the Yang space. Those things basically would go beyond what we are proposing here. So therefore, basically, what is within the proposed scope are basically, first of all, basically refined on-change update semantics. That was also another reason why we did not want to include it with the plain Yang push. Basically, we need to have a distinction whether an object is omitted from an update because an object was, for instance, created or deleted versus that the object is still there, it only fell in and out of range. So basically for this, we will need to have additional update notifications. Then for the stateful filters, basically the proposal is here to have a few selected stateful filters. The one thing basically to enable threshold crossing alerts, including basically with the counter clear threshold. That is one thing. Possibly the ability to have multi-level threshold crossing alerts. There are certain requirements from operators for this. And then the third one includes recent high watermarks. We would basically keep the maximum, you basically update those things, but you have basically some expiration so that basically the equivalent is that of a graphic equalizer that you can use also for performance type of applications. And again, outside of the scope, the more complex things that were mentioned earlier. So therefore, basically, we view this as a logical extension that builds on top of the existing Yang push notification work. It's an enabler for assurance applications and a building block for network automation. And basically, we wanted to assess here the interest of the working group, whether it makes sense to define a solution for this problem here.
Balázs Eriksson. When we go into thresholds and high watermarks, I see a strong connection between this and the alarm Yang module that we pushed into CCAMP. I think it would be very natural that, say, utilization goes over 99%, I want an alarm about that. So I think we should connect up to that.
Martin asks on Jabber, do you have any solution proposal? It would be interesting to see. Do you have any solution proposal?
Well, this is basically what we have a solution proposal on the back of our head, not inside the draft. Basically, that is the question if there's interest to take that up. We believe actually that this is basically a natural extension on top of Yang push. So basically where we have basically currently filter constructs, we would basically add a smart filter augmentation into the Yang push update streams. This is also the reason why we were thinking of NetConf as a working group. Maybe CCAM is another option, but this is basically there's a natural progression of things here.
Yeah. Every time people talk to customers, you say,
name please.
Oh, sorry, Eric Voigt. They say, well, do you have threshold filters for CPU and temperature? So I mean, it pretty much you have the objects, you need the filters, and it is a pretty direct extension for Yang push.
Okay, good. I would actually like to get a poll from the room regarding that level of interest in this draft. I don't know. I mean, without a solution, we can't bring it to adoption. Not to mention we have a number of drafts that are in queue that we probably should focus on first. But a question at the mic.
Yeah, could I just ask a quick question? Because I was going through and I was reading the draft, and I just want to make sure is this draft actually tied to the event, the event condition action architecture? Because you mentioned, this is something that could be extended off a push. I want to make sure that you're thinking, making sure that you're saying, well, it's push, or is it that architecture? Because I think
no, it is separate. It's independent of that. Basically, the automation. Basically, this is also in the automation framework draft. Basically, they want to use this as one source of the events that might then basically be fed into an event condition action.
But it's not really tied to one particular architectural approach or the other. Okay, just want to make sure.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, as a contributor, I do think I view this as a natural progression to the Yang push filtering mechanisms, smart filters, better filters, more and better. Okay, back to interest level from the room. If this is interesting work, can you please raise your hand? If you think, okay, that's a very good number. Okay, thank you. Oh, and you have one more presentation.
Okay.
Benoit, clarification question. Have you tried to blindly Yangify the alarm map? Have you tried to Yangify the alarm map blindly and see if it works?
No, I have not done that.
Okay. But also, I don't think it would have impact to this because I mean, it may be another way to obtain that data, but it wouldn't be via the Yang push mechanism. Like for instance, if you're subscribing to an XPath in a data store.
Understood, but it's just a filter here, right? So yes, there are a couple of things that are Yang specific, but if we do like those filters, these are always the same type of conditions, right? Above a threshold, below a threshold, hysteresis, etc.
Okay, so I think when you're looking to the solution, that might be something to consider.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. Can you go to the next please?
And you have 1 minute.
One more, yeah. If you bring the last.
Maybe
so basically, while you bring it up, basically, this is actually a draft that has nothing to do actually with the Yang push. It's on a different domain. This basically concerns discrepancy detection between NMDA data stores, and basically that's a draft written also with Yingzhen and Jeff. And this is basically something. Whoops. This basically addresses something that we feel basically will be useful as NMDA takes hold to be able to easier, for instance, troubleshoot certain conditions, see and so forth. Basically, the issue is that within NMDA, the same data can be represented across different data stores. The question is, what happens if there are unexpected different discrepancies that persist between object values points in the operational and intended? And okay, I don't have much time, but basically to cut to the chase, therefore basically the draft defines an RPC data model within RPC that allows to compare NMDA data stores and essentially allow this way basically to see if there are any discrepancies, for instance, or any unexpected discrepancies between, for instance, intended and operational, that something is either not propagating or maybe something that was intended is suddenly learned or whatever. Basically, those sorts of issues are, which would otherwise be harder to detect, and would require basically upload of the entire data store to make the comparison at the client, as opposed to be able to basically ask the server to do that. As at the core of the draft is basically a very simple module defining basically this NMDA compare operation. We basically essentially specify a source, a target, a filter a specification, as well as a dampening period, which basically tells you how long, for instance, a discrepancy would need to persist in order to be reported. The last one is made optional, basically or conditional as a feature based on feedback from Rob. Anyway, so this is basically what it is. It's a 0.0 draft right now. We believe this is a straightforward and useful addition. We would like to request feedback from the working group, and also, we're seeking working group adoption.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I've reviewed this draft and provided some feedback onto it. I think it's useful work. I think it's something that various people have been asking for, this sort of be able to do a diff comparison between the different data stores. And I think this sort of solution is on the right guidelines. So,
thanks.
So I think it's also fair to poll for interest in the room. Again, too early for adoption call. Well, we don't have to wait until 101 to do adoption. We can do it between. So if this is interesting work that you'd like to see progress within this working group, can you please raise your hand? It's a good number. Okay.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we are done with.
One last, very last comment. Interest in the work for sure, but you guys are aware NMDA is being done in NetMod, right? If this is an extension to NMDA, then they should be done together.
Good point.
Yes, but the NetConf and RESTConf working with NMDA is done here.
Yeah, Rob Wilson, these are protocol extensions, so this is the right place.
Yeah.
All right. Blue sheets. If anyone has not signed the blue sheet, please do. There's one still floating around in the room. And there's one up here.
And we'll see you in London. Thank you.
With a probability of 98%, I will not. It is untrue that I attend any.
Yeah.